Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, so now it's time for me. I would invite our next presenter, Mr. Stanislas Kowalski from New Generation Pedagogical Research Center, National Institute of Education, Cambodia. And his topic is about low resolution thinking in pedagogy. So please welcome our presenter.
Thank you, Sophie. I could have called my topic Real Issues, Bad Questions. Take a young teacher or a journalist and is asking you, what is the best teaching method? Everybody has some opinion on this. Your minister, your parents, even your kids. Yeah, children have opinion about pedagogy. Annoying, isn't it? As educators, you want to base your response on solid research. You might already have a plan to promote constructivism or some procedures inspired by behaviorism. Maybe you are trying to salvage traditional practices by calling upon neurosciences. I'm a teacher trainer myself. I have written the syllabus of the New Generation Pedagogical Research Center. But if you ask me that question, I will answer you, I don't know. I don't know what is the best teaching method. I don't know because I think nobody really knows. It's a kind of low resolution thinking. Let's be clear. The question is very serious, but it's very poorly formulated. It lacks the most important element, context. The only good response would be, it depends. It's a low resolution thinking because we don't analyze the problem with the level of details that would be necessary. It's important, both theoretically and practically. I will show you that it has catastrophic consequences in pedagogical research, in teacher training, and in educational policies. So first, let me explain clearly what I call low resolution thinking. I will take a comparison. Teaching is similar to engineering. If you ask the question, what is the best plane to an engineer? He will tell you that the question is meaningless. The best plane for what? What are your objectives? Do you want to transport merchandise or do you want to fight? Do you fight low-tech insurgents like in Afghanistan, or do you want to fight Russia? Do you need to go fast or do you need to carry a lot of people? What is your budget? What is the length of your runway? It needs a lot of, to ask you a lot of questions before he can answer your question about the best plane. And it's exactly the same with teaching methods. There is no such thing as a best teaching method. Which subject are you teaching? Who are your students? Are they slow learners? Do they have disabilities? Do they master the prerequisites? Are they comfortable with social interactions? And most importantly, what do they want to become? Lawyers? Stockbrokers? Politicians? Or maybe they just want to be happy in life? So depending on their objectives, not your objectives, the objectives of the teachers are not important. A method can be more relevant than the other. Even rote memory is necessary sometimes. So let me give you a few examples in pedagogy. Direct instruction is rather more suited for establishing solid foundations. With young children, they need to have clear concepts in mind. But there is a danger with direct instructions that is too abstract. A very guided approach might comfort slow learners. But are you sure that your students are slow learners? Maybe they are just ordinary children who are bored and demotivated. So in that case, they might appreciate to have more freedom and more responsibilities. It's difficult to know exactly what they need. Some students are very happy to engage in classroom discussions, but many of them struggle to get their share of speaking time. And some students are shy. Nowadays, lectures are despised. If you go to training institutes, they will tell you that lectures are bad. But people pay a lot of money to listen to a world-class lecturer. Even you, today, you are listening to me. I'm doing a lecture for you. I hope you are not bored yet. Anyway, you get my point. Before I can tell you what teaching method is relevant, I need to understand the context. I need to understand the details of a situation. So that's what I call low resolution thinking. It's some kind of vague general ideas that might sound good, but are not practical because you don't analyze it at the right level. So at this point, maybe you are thinking that I'm not going beyond common sense. It's just common sense, what I've said. And yeah, it's true. But the first thing I've learned as a teacher is that nothing is obvious. And the second thing I've learned as a teacher, it was painful, it's that common sense disappears easily in social interactions. As soon as you have to comply with social norms or obey political orders, you will lose your common sense. It doesn't matter if you live in the West or in Asia, or if you have a specific political regime, doesn't matter. As soon as you have a boss on top of you, you're aligning to his opinion and you forget your common sense. So now I would like to ask another question. Why are we stuck with low resolution thinking? There are a few factors that we can identify. The first one, I think it's time, simply time. Teacher training are short and we must simplify. We must oversimplify. It will take many days to explain constructivism properly. And it's tempting to resume it, to summarize it in one meaningless slogan. We should move from a teacher-centered approach to a student-centered approach. Sounds good. You have heard that kind of sentence. It sounds good, it sounds obvious, but it's a false consensus. Everybody will agree with that kind of sentence. But we have different understanding of it. Everybody will agree that schools are meant for the good of the students. But it's not helpful. If you want to understand it better, you will say that learning occurs in the mind of the learner when he is able to relate new information to his previous schemas. That process can be done only by the learner himself. But even that, it's not practical. It doesn't tell you how to teach. The process described by famous pedagogists like Jean Piaget happens whenever people learn. It doesn't matter if it's through a lecture or not. If you take time to reflect on my lecture, you will learn. It doesn't imply a specific technique, teaching technique. The second factor I would like to share with you is competition. At Surprising, generally, teachers don't think about competition. They don't view themselves as a part of a competition because they are public officers. And we associate competition with market economy. But in reality, competition is a part of every system. There is no competition between schools in a centralized system, but there is a strong competition inside the school bureaucracy. You know, at the top level in the ministry. It's a competition in which the winner takes all. You win or you die. If you want to be authorized to use your teaching method, you have to despise the other teaching method. And it's terrible. It's terribly dangerous. It's a huge dilemma. We need norms and structures to ensure a fair and equal access to education for all the children. But at the same time, we reduce the possibilities to just one strategy. There is no fair conversation in a centralized system. It's replaced by debates. Normally, in a conversation, there is no winner, no loser, just different points of view. But in a debate, you must win. And you must humiliate your opponent. That's a very dangerous problem. Competition is also an issue in research. At Surprising, but if you think about it, if you want to distinguish yourself as a researcher, you must produce surprising results, and you must make sure that you will be published and that you will get the budget. There is a competition for budget, which means that we tend to, criticize the other methods in order to get the upper hand. The third factor I would like to share with you is pedagogy itself. Pedagogy can kill common sense. It's frightening if I explain it like this. But when we want to explain a thing, a pedagogical approach, we do it by comparison in most cases. And usually in teacher training, we compare the new method with the traditional one. The problem is there is no traditional method. It's an empty word. It doesn't exist. what is a traditional method? A tradition is just a combination of all the surviving strategies that have existed. There is not one traditional method. There are lots of methods. And by doing it, we destroy as much as we create. We destroy the methods that the teachers already have in order to replace it with our own method. And it reduces the possibilities instead of increasing them. So I hope by this point you have understood that we need to do better. So now what? What should we do to avoid that kind of low resolution thinking? In research, we should be careful not to jump to conclusions. Don't put too much trust in statistics. Spend time on your narrative. Make sure that the setting that you are testing is sufficiently described with all the details of the activities so that your readers can really understand what you mean. If you calculate a p-value, it will not make your paper more reliable if at the same time people can interpret your concepts and learning activity as they like. If they have different understanding of your concept, your statistics are useless. In the same idea, you should be very careful with meta-analysis. I don't believe much in meta-analysis because it's like trying to do facial recognition with compressed images. Now, that's for research. In teacher training, I would like to share a few ideas. Be careful when you compare your method with the traditional one. Don't make any method mandatory. Don't try to promote or to dismiss a technique. Just propose a new tool in the toolbox of the teacher. If your technique is really a bit better for the objectives of the teachers, he will adopt it without any coercion. If you want to avoid doing this mistake by just by chance, promoting or dismissing, when you explain your ideas, prefer very concrete examples rather than false opposition, like I said. And I think mentors can help a lot to avoid that kind of low resolution thinking, because mentors base their recommendations on observation, direct observation. I really think it's a good approach to be connected with reality. And the last thing I would like to share with you today is about educational policies. I don't mind which level you are in the hierarchy. It's important for all the guys who have some kind of responsibility, from the school directors to maybe the minister. It's important that teachers feel entitled to make practical decisions. Not all the decisions should be made by the top leaders. In fact, it's the contrary. As much as possible, let the lowest level make the decision. Teachers should make most of the decision, the pedagogical decisions, because only the teachers have the knowledge about the circumstances that are necessary to make a good decision. So, in short, I think teacher educators should have one thing in mind: to empower teachers. Thank you for your attention.
Yep, so thank you very much, Mr. Stan, for your meaningful presentation, and I really appreciate with your great experience in Cambodia. So far, we have got a question from our participants. So the first question is from John Sampo. The written that thanks for your great presentation. Could you clarify what caused the limitation of teacher perspective in pedagogy? Thanks. So please answer.
There are different reasons. And it's not just about teachers' perspectives. Even trainers, even world-class researchers make mistakes about pedagogy, as I said, because they have reasons to oversimplify. For teachers, in general, it's because it's easier to use slogans, to use very simple ideas. It's just easier. But we are stuck with false oppositions for the reasons I've mentioned. The competition between thinkers who want to win the debate instead of discussing. Also because of, so, as I mentioned as well, because I don't have time to dig deep into the problems, because it sounds good to have ideas that seemingly can solve all the problems. You look smart when you have a general idea that can solve all the problems. It's very frustrating, in fact, to tell, oh, it depends. Oh, I don't know. And I think pride is a problem. Pride among teacher educators, pride among ministers, pride among researchers. They want to give you the answers. But maybe sometimes there is no answer. There are lots of questions that are dealt with at a very low resolution level. For instance, is class repetition a good thing? Or should we promote the students automatically? It's a stupid question. There is no good answer. Some students will tell you that class repetition have saved them. And some students will tell you that it was horrible. And both of them are right, because both situations exist. Sometimes class repetition just makes you feel bad. Sometimes you really need to repeat a class because you don't have the foundation. So it's impossible, it's logically impossible to give one single answer to that question. You need to precise the circumstances. But yeah, it sounds good.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we have got another question, the written there. As you have mentioned that we should not promote a particular pedagogy, why does NTI school system encourage constructivism in the teaching practice?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it can be useful to some extent to introduce methods that are not usual in a country. In Cambodia, very few teachers know about constructivism. Very few teachers have strategies like IBL, PBL. So it's good to introduce these methods. But I think it should not be done at the expense of what the teachers already know, what other methods they can apply already. It's just adding some new methods to the toolbox. But don't remove what they do well. Maybe they're good at making students memorize things. And it's useful. Don't destroy the house before you can build another house. If you destroy your roof, if you dismiss what the others do, and you have only a 3-day workshop to explain a new method, you will have teachers who are afraid of using their traditional method, whatever they are, and are not proficient enough to apply the new methods that you want to promote. It's very dangerous, in fact. Sometimes teachers, after a training, they know less than before. So, see,
okay. Yes, thank you very much. And we have got another question from Mr. Chiang Chanak from Cambodia. So the question is written that, if I am not wrong, you suggest not to use quantitative analysis to show the low thinking in pedagogy. So why? Another question is that,
okay,
if we,
the first question first.
Okay, so you can answer.
So it's possible to use statistics, but it's not enough to have numbers. Putting numbers on your research is not enough to make it reliable. We spent a lot of time to learn how to use statistics, and it's difficult. But you should not neglect the other component of your research, which is narration, your narrative, the explanations you give. You can make very nice statistics if your definitions are not clear. If your descriptions are not clear, it's useless. But yes, you can use your statistics. It's very important. But you should combine your statistical approach and your description. Both are important in your research. And be careful when you have statistics that work in a specific context. You cannot draw conclusions for the entire system. If you, for instance, find that IBL is very useful in a specific context, you cannot say that all the IBL strategies are good, because people have different definitions of IBL. And they have different activities in mind when they talk about IBL. So you cannot say, oh, I have found a very nice correlation between success and IBL, and that's it. IBL should be used every time. It's not true. Simply not true. Okay?
Okay,
is that
so
clearer?
Yeah, thank you. And we move to the other question is, what if we a good teaching methodology or technique to demonstrate to the teacher, but they are not talking about strategy to apply in the classroom because they think that the traditional method is still effective. So in this case, do you have any solution to lobby them to try a new techniques, especially 21st century method?
Okay, that question makes me laugh a little bit, especially at the end, because 21st century method, I don't know what it is, except using a computer to do whatever you want. Most of the techniques that we label 21st century are in fact very ancient. Like well, IBL, what is IBL? Asking questions to the student and let them research in documents. Okay. It exists since libraries exist. It has existed for maybe 2,000 years. Or maybe you are thinking about a Socratic method. Socrates was a Greek philosopher 2,400 years ago. So it's not new at all. So their traditional method can be many things, as I said. Maybe it's just pure repetition, but maybe they have a combination of exercises, explanations, and so on. So before you judge their choice, be careful. Should we lobby them to try a new technique? Well, that's complicated. I would say it depends where they are in their training. To me, it's important that a new teacher tries at least once every teaching method. It's a part of their education as teacher. So I think at the NIA or at TEC, National Institute of Education, or Teacher Educational College, they should have the opportunity to try the technique. It should be mandatory to try. But once you know the technique, you still have to make choices. In fact, you will choose a technique each time you do a lesson, not once for all. You will not choose the same technique all the time. So it's important that they have more methods in their toolbox. So it means that it's important for them to train with each method. But after that, when they are in their own class with their own students, they make the decision, not you, not the mentors, not the trainers, because they know the circumstances that are necessary to make a good decision. So as mentor, I think you should consider asking them to do it, to try it at least once when you are present in their classroom. Next time I visit you, try it because you are missing an opportunity. And after that, make your own decision. Okay?
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Stan, for your answer. And we have got another question from Professor Jennifer McMahon from the United States. So the question is written that, thank you for your insightful presentation. I agree that we have to be careful about not dismissing pedagogical techniques. But how do you guide teachers to evaluate whether or not the method they are using is effective or the students in front of them?
Well, evaluating a teaching method is complicated. We don't have enough time and resources to conduct a proper experiment. And even if we conduct a proper experiment, we need comparison points. So it's quite tricky. One thing that you can compare is the situation of the class before and after. If the students feel more comfortable, if they are more engaged, that's observational. It depends on observation. So you can ask a teacher to try a new method and observe how the class reacts and maybe make them pass some tests. If you want to do it in a more professional way, in a more methodological way for research, it will be difficult to draw conclusions because, as I said, you need to describe precisely the situation before and after, what kind of method you are comparing, it's not just whether IBL is effective or not, it's whether IBL is more effective than another method that the teacher has applied before. So, and the results might be different depending on circumstances. It will be very difficult to reproduce the experiments because there are many factors involved. So in general, the choice of the teachers it's just based on the comfort they have with their class, with specific topics. They just observe that for a specific lesson, maybe on trigonometry, they get better results if they start with some inquiry. If they start with a practical problem rather than with a theory. Maybe. Just an observation that they make. But it's difficult to apply to reproduce the finding of researchers. It's good to do research, but when you do research, please be very careful about the context and the circumstances. I hope I have responded to your question. We have a short period of time to do that. It will take a lot of discussion maybe to respond to this.
Okay, so thank you very much. And let's move to the last question from Satyam from Cambodia. Could you clarify low resolution thinking again in order to make it more practical by its concept? Thank you.
Okay, so when I say low resolution, it's exactly like high resolution or low resolution in your camera. Low resolution is that you consider just a few factors. You don't go deep in the details. If you have high resolution, you look at the details. You have the details, the practical things from the field, from the real classroom. If you want to have a general idea that you try to apply to every school, every class, every grade, every subject, you are doomed to fail. Like, what is the best teaching method? There is no answer because circumstances make a difference. There are lots and lots of examples of low resolution thinking in educational debates. As I mentioned, class repetition is one. You might have other examples like should we punish the students or not? Good luck with that, to get one single answer to that, one simple answer. You need to analyze what kind of punishment for what kind of action and what is your time frame, if you have to react very fast or not. Sometimes even physical reaction to the misbehavior of the student is absolutely necessary for their own safety. When I was in Africa, my students fought each other very often. Like every day, I was afraid of a fight between my students. It's cultural, okay? I lived in a very violent environment. When a student is picking a stone to throw on his classmate, I don't reflect, I don't think, I am authorized to use my force to stop him. No, I just stop him because I don't want someone to be injured. Okay? That's an exception to the general rule that you should not use force against physical strength against your students. There is an exception. So circumstance matter.
Okay, so thank you very much for your answer and also your attending in this session. Yes, and also thank you very much for all the participants that you try to drop any question to ask our presenter. Yeah, so thank you very much, Mr. Stan. So okay, so you can relax now. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, while we move to the other section, but because our speaker, maybe she or he have the problem with internet connection. But anyway, we have the video record of Professor Marilyn L. Grady of University of Nebraska, Lincoln of United States. So our team will play the video record of our guest speaker. So please watch and enjoy it. And when you listen or watch the video, you can drop any question to our Zoom chat box. Thank you.